Hello, and today we're back with some more Star Wars Legion. This is the Crab Droids and the Aqua Droids, and these two boxes are part of the new Star Wars Legion refresh, which I cannot wait for. So without further ado, let's jump in. I'm doing my usual thing of priming the models in black once they're assembled. I use plastic glue because they are quite spindly and I wanted a pretty secure bond. And then I'm going to do a zenithal prime, but for this I'm going to be using a neutral grey. And that's because I don't want to build up straight up to white just yet. I just want to make sure that there's still a highlight, but it's not too bright. And of course, doing the same for the Crab Droids as well. I'm going to start off with the Krabs. So for this, I'm using Kalahari Orange. I'm hoping to get that kind of crab carapace looking color, but also stay fairly true to the depictions in the Clone Wars TV show. And as you can see, this color was dead on, but it was just a little too thin. It's kind of streaky. So to save some time and to get just a little bit more even coverage, I'm going back to the airbrush and just airbrushing this on. You could of course get a nice smooth coverage with just a few coats on the brush. And then kind of reverse engineering here, I've gone back to the neutral grey and I've covered up those sections where I oversprayed with the airbrush. If you're doing this by hand, of course, you could just be a little bit more neater and you could save yourself a step here. Next up is some Nuln oil, and this is just going to be a quick shade over all of those metallic grey sections. I just wanted to add some shading back in and make it look less flat. I'm taking care not to get it on the orange as well. Here we've got some brown leather, and to get that really kind of crab-like texture, I'm using a sponge for this. You could use an old bristly brush as well, but I'm just dabbing on some of that brown leather. I'm kind of aiming it towards the lower section of the legs to kind of imply almost like a rounded shadow. And then on the back of the crab, I'm just aiming it towards the back section. I'm looking for texture rather than brushstrokes at this point, so this sponging technique is really good for kind of adding those really small textured details. And then here I'm using Tau Light Ochre. Now this is a little bit more of an extreme color because it's such a bright yellow, but now I'm kind of dabbing on the opposite side. So wherever I did those brown leather dabs, I'm now doing the other side in the Tau Light Ochre. And what this is doing is it's creating that kind of shell texture, but also adding a natural highlight to the other side. And then while I still have that color on the palette, I'm now edge highlighting some of those harder edges on the legs. And for this, I'm just using the edge of my brush and just letting it catch the sculpt. And I'm not edge highlighting all the way down, just kind of where I think the light would hit it, and then I just stop. This helps kind of reinforce that this is part of the texture on the crab and not just kind of some random dots. As you can see here for the back of the crab, I'm just kind of running the brush along the edge, but not going all the way down. For some damage, I'm going to be using some plate mail metal. And for this, I'm going to be kind of dry brushing this onto the leg sections, and I'm not too worried about accuracy and detail here. I'm just kind of running the brush along it very quickly. And it's a very good way of getting a brushed steel look fairly quickly, and also kind of conveying the idea that this has got damage on it, like scratches and things like that. I've also decided to add a few bits of damage to the carapace itself, so I'm just kind of dabbing on some silver. This is the plate mail metal again, and choosing areas of like high point contact, like the edges here, and just kind of adding in some random shapes and scratches. For acryls, bold titanium white is my go-to white, and so for this I'm going to be prepping the eyeball lenses in the white, because I'm going to be using a fluorescent paint, and a white undercoat really helps accentuate that fluorescent color. And so here is some fluorescent red. You could use just a regular bright red, and the white underneath will really bump it up, but I like the fluorescent colors because they have a little bit of translucency to them, and so you get a really nice vibrant red. And then I'm adding just a little dot of white to the lens to add kind of a shine. I've decided to go all out on the bases, so for that I'm going to be using some Milliput. And the effect I'm trying to achieve is kind of a rock pool, coastal appearance. So I'm going for kind of a rocky coastline with some areas of like trapped seawater. And to achieve that, I'm going to be mixing up this Milliput. This is a 2-part kind of putty that you have to mix together, these 2 rolls, and it will dry pretty hard. So I'm starting to kind of rough in a donut shape on the base. I'm not worried about the sight lines on the base. I've got little measurement tools for those if I play the game. So I'm going to be covering up the lines on the base. I'm also looking to not add too much height to the base because I don't want to throw off any kind of sight lines or anything. So this is just a little bit of height so I don't have to use so much texture paint later on. And then while that's drying, I'm then just going to dry fit the crab on just to make sure that I'm pretty happy with the result here. For the texture paint, I'm going to be using Pro Acryl's Golden Earth, and I'm just going to cover up the whole thing. So now that this is dry, I'm just covering up the whole base with this texture paint to give it a uniform, sandy appearance. This also helps kind of hide some of the seams where the Milliput meets the base as well. And while that paint is drying, I'm just dropping in a few random rocks and little pieces of cork to kind of add some texture to it. For the rock pools themselves, I'm using a mix of Balor Brown and Baharroth Blue. I've mixed these together on the wet palette, and I'm just kind of painting that into these divots on the base. If you look at reference, you can kind of see that the rock pools have a very blue appearance because of the seawater and the way the light hits it. So I'm going to be artificially recreating that with some paint. And then I'm also mixing in some Gauss Blaster Green with that Balor Brown and creating almost like a gradient up to that sandy color. Obviously, the thinner the layer of water, the brighter the color underneath. So by getting this deep blue gradient going all the way up to that sandy color, creates the impression of depth. And then this is entirely optional, but I've decided to add just a small dab of Tyran blue into that Baharroth blue at the bottom there to just really kind of give it a little bit more definition. I'm gluing on some tufts here. These are some like Highland tufts or something from Army Painter. And this is going to be kind of implying seaweed and lichen moss and things like that. So for this is just an Elmer's glue. Again, I'm letting every stage dry before I move on to the next thing. And kind of an order of operations. I'm building out the bases, and then I'm going to glue on the crab once I'm happy with it. And for this, I'm just using some super glue just to kind of get it into place. And because I dry fitted it earlier, you can kind of see some notches where it kind of dug into the Milliput. And then after that's dry, I'm then going to just cover up some of these gaps where the feet don't quite meet the base with that golden earth again. For the bases, I'm going to be using coal black, and this is just a quick coat around the base just to kind of tidy up some overspill. And then I'm going to matte varnish the miniature just to protect the paint job. And then after that's dry, I've decided to use some realistic resin water. You could use some UV cure water. This is kind of like air dry resin, and I wanted to use this because of the nozzle on the end. And I'm just filling in these rock pools with some of this air dry resin. Now it will evaporate a little bit, so you have to do a couple layers each. And for some of the bubbles, you have to use a toothpick to kind of get rid of those. Okay, now we're using some bright neutral grey. So we're moving on to the Aqua Droids, and I'm going to be dry brushing this on pretty much like we did for the Krabs legs. You could use a metallic paint for this. I've decided to do a non-metallic on the Aqua Droids just to kind of vary it up a little bit, and I'm looking to kind of recreate that texture that they have on the Clone Wars show. So this is just an all-over dry brush, and once I'm happy with it, it's time to move on to the next step. And so I've gone back to that Gauss Blaster green, and I'm starting to highlight a lot of the trim that they have. Luckily these details are raised, so for this you can just use your edge of your brush and just take your time, work your way around the model, and just highlight that trim. This paint is a little thin, so I did 2 coats on each one of these sections. Here's some bold titanium white that I'm using for the lenses, exactly like I did on the Krabs. So I'm just prepping the lens on the arm and the lens on the face here. And then I'm going in with that fluorescent red, exactly the same method that I did previously. I'm tidying up any kind of overspill with just that neutral grey, and this helps just to cover up some of those sections where the brush was just a little inaccurate. I decided to use some petroleum grey here for the joints and some of the smaller technical sections. This helps break up the model just a little bit so it's not just a single grey colour. And you could of course do this before the dry brush, but I just got kind of eager and dove straight in. So I'm just taking some extra care not to get it onto the arms and legs. I'm also using this for some of these smaller sections of trim. And then I've decided to use some bold titanium white as kind of an edge highlight for the Gauss Blaster green. I'm not looking to cover it up, but any kind of section that's upturned, I'm adding almost like an edge highlight to this detail. So you can see on the arms here, I'm not looking to cover up the whole thing, just kind of around the upturned areas on that detailing. And on the legs here, almost like an edge highlight just along the top of that trim. For the leader, I'm going to be adding just a little bit more of a detail on him so I can distinguish him. So I'm adding a white stripe along the top of his head. This isn't based on anything, this is just my own kind of creation, just so I can spot the leader in the group. And then I'm also adding a white stripe continuing down his chest here. And then I'm going in with some neutral grey just to add some chipping and damage. And this helps break up that white paint and make it look like it's weathered and worn. I'm just adding a quick dry brush to the hands with some neutral grey. And then I'm going to be recreating the same bases that I did for the Crab droids on these Aqua droids. So I'm just going through exactly the same process, using the milliput to build up some height, and then covering it with the texture paint. And then once that's dry, varnishing the model and then using the resin. I've decided to add one final detail, a fairly generous coating of Agrax Earthshade to take it out of that sand spectrum and more into like the rock appearance. And then once that's dry, the droids are done. There you have it, some Aqua Droids and Crab Droids. These are a really deep cut. These are kind of strange and weird and interesting, but I kind of love them. They do remind me of like Barnacle a lot as well, so that's really cool. I had a lot of fun painting these. The paint schemes themselves are quite simple, but I like the fact that I pushed myself on the bases and made them look really kind of unique. As always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. And is anyone also like super hyped for Legion 2.0? Like I'm seeing all the reveals of all the new sets and I'm just getting really excited for a whole new wave of Legion. I just want to say a quick thank you to my YouTube members. And lastly, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and also check out my Patreon. I've got like some new stuff getting launched every month on there, and there's some really cool extras. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one.